Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Only Murders in the Building. Great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, this is my first time watching the show. Season 2 has actually kind of already started, but, I'm kind of in catch-up mode lately. So, but nevertheless, I thought this was kind of a nice start. Obviously, we get our in media res opening where it's like, yeah, we start at 2 months in the future and then we work our way back where it seems like, oh, Mabel's the suspect, well, because she's covered in someone's blood. I think that's the lady, jumping ahead a little bit, whose apartment they break into. Bunny, I think that's her body. To my recollection, it most likely might not be, but that's immediately who I thought. But obviously Mabel was like, it's not what you think it is. And the fact is, they're running from the cops, so maybe the cops think they are responsible for the murder. Obviously, all of that's out of context. But we get introduced to our three protagonists, Charles, James, I don't know why I was about to say James, Oliver, and then Mabel. So I like that opening where you basically get their three specific like monologues and perspectives on like living where they live. Obviously, we find out about Charles being an actor from like a very Brazos, this particular show, and I love that whole sequence with him and that guy, and the guy being like, oh yeah, he's like, oh yeah, we used to watch the show at the time with my dad. Like, what franchise is that at the time? And he says the thing, it's like, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, but sadly my dad has ALS, and you're like, oh, and it just kind of goes worse and worse and worse, and it's like, yeah. He's still holding on, but the family kind of wishes that he wouldn't. And it's, oh, could you take a picture? He's like, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, make sure you tell your dad that Brazos took that picture. It's like, yeah, but he probably won't be able to understand because, it's like, yeah. It's like, oh, that's that complicated thing. I almost wonder, there's a layer to that? Like, it's almost a little bit of a, not that it's a bad thing, but it is this thing of like, sometimes you'll run into a celebrity. I mean, I think in general, we can have a tendency as people to like dump like what we're going through on someone, especially sometimes it's like, oh, kind of like tell a celebrity or somebody that you bump into like a kind of very personal story, which, and that's a beautiful connection you can have sometimes, but it's like, yeah, it is kind of a lot to throw like your life complications and sadness on someone randomly. That's a lot. Someone who didn't really ask for it, you just kind of like, you just vomit all over on them. So I thought that was just kind of messed up. Oh, well, it's very sad, just context of what that dude's going through, his family and everything, but just kind of like Charles not knowing what to do or what to say. He's just kind of like, oh, okay. Then we have Oliver, who is this director, and kind of the way he kind of almost like treats everything almost like it's a stage, it's beautiful, and then like that car almost hits him and he's like, what, do you not see this coat I'm wearing? It's like, it's too vibrant for you to not notice it. Are you that blind? And then we get Mabel, who, going into this, I was kind of like, yeah, she seems like she's kind of got that deadpan approach. Like, Selena Gomez is going about it like a very deadpan approach. And I think that's such an interesting thing, because obviously, like, it's people from two different generations, because it's like, there's Charles and Oliver's generation, and then you have, like, a younger generation. So it's almost, I think it's almost like that boomer and millennial conjunction. But it's like, this is a pairing I never would have thought. Martin Short and Steve Martin makes sense, but like throwing Selena Gomez into the mix, it's almost like, that's a trio I never would have ever thought, like, oh, that'd be an interest, like, you just wouldn't think that. I don't know. It makes sense on paper, like, right, like I said, getting an older people and then, like, the young person, because, like, that's kind of, like, the go-to, like, dynamic, especially nowadays, I think, to some extent. Like, oh, yeah, you got the old, out-of-touch person, and the more younger, hipper person. Like, I mean, that's nothing, like, new. It's a very... But it's just, like, this particular conversation, like I said, just... That's not a combination I would have expected. Either way, Mabel's whole thing is about how, what was it, like 2,000 women get like attacked every year in the city or something like that. I mean, it might even been like day or something, but I think it was like a year or something like that. But she's like, yeah, I sometimes will wake up having a dream of some guy on, in my room, and what do? I get on top of him, I take my sewing needle and I stab him. And then she's like, sometimes she can't sleep, and thinking about that helps her go to sleep. I'm like, okay. And like I said, our trio meeting, like, they've crossed paths before, but then in the elevator and just the awkwardness, and Oliver being the more sociable one trying to talk, but it's almost like he's trying to connect with Mabel about the yellow Beats, headphones, and it's just like, just hurry up and get off the elevator. But we find out the thing that connects them all is that they listen to a podcast. All is Not Okay in Oklahoma, is that what it is? Which it's, I'm assuming Cindy is Tina Fey's character. Which I don't think I knew that she was going to be in this, even to that capacity. I was like, oh, Tina Fey? I was like, wow, that's wild. But fire alarm goes off. The moment the guy walks by Charles in a white hoodie, it's like, while everyone's exiting building, you're going up. That's awkward. That's weird. That's suspicious. But then the trio connects over the podcast, and I love them being like, oh my god, like it's such a funny and interesting thing that's what ended up uniting it, because I think I knew the premise of it being that they were going to connect over a podcast, this would be a podcast. I think I knew that, but I didn't know they also connected over a particular murder podcast or true crime podcast. So that was interesting. And so when they get back, they find out, hey, there was a suicide in the building. It's the guy they were in the elevator with like an hour ago. And I wasn't expecting them to show they were like, oh, he committed suicide. I get immediately in my head, I'm like, oh, it must have been a hang or something. And then they show like the blown out side of his head. I was like, Jesus, I wasn't expecting you actually to show that. Wow. And even, Charles being like, oh, I've been on, Brazos was kind of a probably crime drama. He's like, I've been around, fake dead bodies. But he's like, have any of you kind of ever dealt with that before? But it didn't make sense to them, because it's like, right, this guy an hour ago was just kind of making plans and everything. He didn't seem like the type who was ready to kill himself. And I love the detective being like, oh my god, you fucking crime drama, true crime podcast nut jobs. And I think that's such a funny thing, because they're like, I feel like it comes up a little bit in like procedurals and crime dramas because true crime podcasts are probably like some of the highest rated podcasts. They're probably like, they have like the biggest audience and stuff like that, and there's so many of them. I wish I should also know, well, not just podcast wise, but even TV show wise, because my mother stayed. I don't know if she watches it she still watches a lot of like true crime stuff, like the stuff on like of the same ilk as like the First 48 and Dateline. She watches stuff like that. She used to stay on the ID channel just because like she's all about the true crime. I watch crime dramas, but I'm not too, unless it's like something getting adapted, like like most recent, like Under the Banner of Heaven. Like that's the only time I'll watch something like true crime related. I won't go out of my way like true. The separation of it being fake, I like that. I don't, yes, you can make parallels to real life, but like it being real people, it messes with me in my head too much. So once again, unless it's like a dramatization, that's always a whole thing. But regardless. So, but my whole point was, I wonder how much do detectives in real life have to deal with that? Because like we've seen, with things that have popped up, real life wise, that people on the internet turn into basically amateur detectives, thinking that they know in and out things better. And for her, I'm like, she's probably like, I've had to deal with so many people who listen to podcasts thinking they have more experience and understanding than me, someone who has been a detective for years or something like that. It's like, yeah, your knowledge of some podcasts you've listened to versus my experience and my training, so that was interesting. But they kind of leave it as big because it's like, right, the suicide note and everything. But then they couldn't let it go because I wonder what it was that got Oliver, because both Mabel and Charles were immediately thinking about the trash bag. Like, right, if, why was he throwing out the trash if he was just, so it's like, right. So they end up finding like notes, which now in retrospect, I don't think were suicide notes. They were like notes for making a proposal. What I thought was interesting though at the time was Mabel was getting a little choked up while reading it. And I was almost like, oh, that's interesting. Now with later context in the episode, I was like, oh, it makes sense what she was kind of hiding. But yeah. And at first I almost because at the time, Oliver's like, oh my God, we can make a podcast of this and stuff like that. And he keeps like directing Charles on like what he should do. It's like, oh, you should put more emphasis on a kill. Like, I'm right here. You don't have to scream. Just kind of, it's like, okay. Like kind of like, and Charles been like, all right, just say action, tell me when to start. It's like, okay, and I'm making a whole thing of it. But when it does seem clear, like it is a suicide, it's like, right, they walk away, but they couldn't stop not thinking about it, because Mabel focused on in the elevator, he talked about a missing package. I mean, that's what she assumed it was about, because packages get delivered to the wrong places all the time, so... And Charles had just gotten an offer for a role, but it was no lines. And he's like, right, they're looking for a Brazos type, but not me. And it's like, oh, because this kind of starts tiptoeing in that Barry direction where you're just like, oh, that's interesting. Because obviously you can't help but like draw a parallel between like Gene and, well, I guess Gene's more like a Oliver than he is a Charles. But I guess truth be told, he's probably like a combination of two. Either way. I thought that was a really neat sequence too, because obviously, like, it's just kind of like, yeah, it's murder and fun, but also we kind of get really serious when they end up, ultimately breaking into Bunny's apartment. And each one of them got really serious, because even though he wasn't there, Oliver's kind of going through his thing. But let's break it down. So Charles, we find out that growing up, he heard so much how much like he was like his father. And I think to some extent he liked that. And he knew that most people took that as a compliment. Well, most people meant it as a compliment. But considering the circumstances of why he didn't want to end up like his father is because his father was awful to his mother. And he's like, he would kind of make her feel small, and it's almost like he got pleasure out of it. So that's why he's like, I feel like that's why I'm fine with being alone, because if I'm so much like my father to the point that we're both right-handed, but we use our scissors or our left hands, who's to say if I get in a relationship with someone, I won't end up treating them the exact same way my father treated my mother. It's just this complicated cycle. Like, you grow up in that, you kind of predisposed to it, you're most likely to kind of fall into those same habits maybe. And he's worried about that. Then we find out about Maybelle, that the apartment she's living in is her aunt's, because it's like, right, someone so young as her living in an apartment like that, because at least Oliver and Charles have lived here like 30-ish years to be where they are. So it's like, it makes sense for them, but like, she's someone on a younger side being in this place. But she says it's her aunt's place. She's helping with the renovation. And she talks about this being the first time she's ever been on her own, because she had her own little crew, the Hardy Boy. Could we find out later on, she's hiding the fact is that the guy and they completely ignored each other. So what's up with that? Did he not notice her? Like, why was no interaction with them in that elevator? I guess they just don't see, they just avoid each other and pretend like the other doesn't exist, and just get so caught up in their own worlds. But it's like, right. But now, like I said, it makes sense why she was crying when she was reading those notes, because she was thinking like, oh, this is what he was going through. And now it makes you wonder, the wedding ring, was it for her? Must be a new girl in his life, and maybe that's also like probably a complicated thing of like, right, there was a thing between them, and maybe something went sideways, he ended up moving on, and you both treated each other more like strangers, because maybe something happened to the other two, because she really didn't go too much into it. She just said like, right, maybe we were better off alone, which is interesting, because going back to Charles for a little bit, like, someone's like, oh, those omelets you smell, he's like, yeah, you always make you all the time. It reminds me of Lucy, which you're like, okay, so is he divorced? Does he have a wife named Lucy, or maybe he has a daughter? But I'm assuming, just with the context of everything, it's probably like a wife. That it's like, did she die? And he hasn't told anyone, like, oh, the person he loved died, and maybe he didn't treat her the best way, or maybe he is divorced and no one knows. Because like, for that guy to throw out Lucy's name like that, and he's like, yeah, I'll let her know. It's like, so no one in the building knows. So it might be a thing of she died, but he hasn't really talked about it, so no one else really knows, because he kind of keeps to himself. So probably aside from like your casual like, hey, hi there, ho there. Nevertheless, and then we get to Oliver, because job wise he's struggling with things, and so he has to ask his son for like, oh, can I need paying like rent in the apartment, which his son is like, just sell the apartment, but he's like, I can't. I guess it's because it's that very Gene Cousineau thing of like the prestige of, this is who you're supposed to be, and I shouldn't be struggling, but work is kind of dried up. I doubt it's the exact same reasons as Gene, because Gene is like, well, let's face it, Gene's an asshole. I don't think Oliver has that, but you never know. But his son Will is reluctant to help him out anymore. It's like, right, we've been through this over and over again, and he feels despicable too, because he's like, right, I shouldn't be asking you that. Part of me was wondering, could it be, I mean, they didn't go into it, but it definitely seems like they do kind of have like not the closest relationship. So part of me wonders, was he so busy working on productions and stuff that he wasn't there for his son? He wasn't there in his son's life. I mean, once again, a parallel, just like Gene, we learned about his circumstances with his son, so maybe it's kind of a similar thing too. And but ultimately, this investigation, there being something more to it, really sparked something in him again. And I love that representation, because it was that mirroring that thing that he was referencing earlier. Obviously, like him, everyone having their respective thing kind of bouncing and coming back into their hands. Because I kept wondering about the whole Charles thing. I was about to say Steve. The whole Charles thing of him making the omelets but throwing them away. I'm like, what is that? I'm assuming it has to have some correlation with the Lucy thing, because he makes an omelet until the very end. He makes just a sunny side up egg, and then he puts it on a plate. So the omelet must be specifically like he used to make them for Lucy all the time. Once again, we don't know what those circumstances are, but that's his secret. Like I said, Oliver's secret is like his money struggles, but there might be like more to that. And then Mabel's secret is her connection to the Hardy Boys. And I love that thing of sometimes we're ready. It's easier to kind of call out and deal with someone else's secrets rather than having to deal with your own. So thought that was kind of an interesting setup to be like, okay, so it isn't just us, these strangers getting together and investigating this case, which one of them has an even closer stake and connection to this that she hasn't revealed yet for whatever reason. But also, they all have their respective secrets that will eventually bubble to the surface, because nothing ever stays secret for long. You learn that time and time again in any good mystery. So, but I'm very, very excited to see where all this goes. Obviously, them investigating everything while also doing their true crime podcast of Only Murders in the Building. And it's like, oh, they said the thing, the name of the episode, they said it, oh my god. I mean, not the name of the episode, the name of the show, they said it, I will always remember that Family Guy. And that's why I'll be Superman 4, Search for Peace, or something like that. Oh, so that's why they call it that, Nevertheless, I'm very excited to continue the show and see where everything is up taking us going forward from here. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good